Good afternoon. Welcome. There is a quorum present, and I call the November 3rd, 2015 meeting of the Board of Education to order. We have a special guest with us this afternoon, a Juliana Wood. If you would come forward, a fourth grade student at Salem Avenue Elementary. And Juliana is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, Juliana, welcome again. Would you like to introduce your guest that you brought with you? Can you talk into the mic?
In the fourth row
Okay.
is one of my assistant principals, my mom, and my grandparents.
Okay. Would you stand up just a moment so we can see you? Thank you. Okay, Juliana, I understand you're very comfortable in front of a mic, and that's something about a play that you're in. Would you like to share that information with us?
Well, I'm in The Wizard of Oz in Chambersburg, and this Friday is when the performances are going to start, and it's going to be Friday, Saturday, two Saturdays, and then Sunday, and then the next weekend, the same schedule.
Perfect. What part are you playing?
I'm a munchkin.
Love it. Excellent.
And a poppy.
And a poppy. Good for you. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about school or home or what you enjoy doing?
This Thursday, I just passed all my math facts.
Passed all your
math facts.
Yay. All right. Congratulations.
And also, I really enjoy doing that. And I like multiplication.
Speak up.
I like multiplication.
Yay.
And I like reading too, but math is my favorite subject.
Perfect. I love it. Is there one additional thing you'd like us to know about you? That's it.
No.
Okay. Thank you so much, Juliana, for opening our meeting. Okay, we will start with approval of the agenda.
Madam President, I move for the approval of the agenda as presented by the Agenda Planning Committee.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. A second?
Second.
Mrs. Fisher, any discussion on the agenda?
Madam President, I'd like to move to amend the agenda to place under new business an action item which would call for this board in the future to segregate the minutes to allow for the student representative to vote on minutes for which she is eligible to vote.
Okay, just so I understand the motion, you're asking for it to be placed as possibly number 7 under new business?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, to discuss minutes. Is there a second to that amendment? Amended motion.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Madam President, I'm just asking for a courtesy to be put into practice from the future into the future where these minutes are separated so that the student representative may vote on business meeting minutes. Obviously, she would not be allowed to vote on work session or closed session minutes.
Very good, unless she attends.
Unless she attends as.
Correct. Okay, very good. Any additional? Mrs. Williams?
Yes, after our last meeting where this was presented as an amendment to the agenda, I spent some time looking at Robert's Rules, and according to Robert's Rules, as I understand it, there doesn't need to be a motion to accept minutes, and neither does one have to be in attendance at a meeting to vote to approve the minutes. If the minutes are presented, they are accepted as presented according to Robert's Rules unless there is a motion to amend or to make another change that would be, I guess, an amendment. Then the vote would be taken. So really, I see no need to add the agenda item. I think the student representative is able to vote according to Robert's Rules, and I think another interesting fact I read was that if you're not in attendance, if you're absent from a meeting, you don't have to abstain. You can also consent for approval of the minutes by not offering an amendment.
Any additional comments on the motion as presented? Okay.
Go ahead, Mrs. Fisher.
I'm no expert on Robert's Rules. It's been a good while since I've read through them. But some of that just doesn't seem, I don't know, logical to me. I'm wondering if we should get some official ruling before we proceed with any kind of separation of the minutes.
My understanding is that our policy calls for Robert's Rules as a guideline,
Right.
and it has always been best practice as we've handled the minutes in our agenda. And what we're attempting to do, if I understand Mr. Ridenour's motion, is based on a request by our student member to allow her what she feels is the opportunity to vote on the meetings that she attends. So I think the motion on the table right now is Mr. Ridenour's to amend the agenda to allow for an action item, and my suggestion is this could be further discussed at that time. Mr. Ridenour, you have...
No, I think you covered what I was about to say, that we do not follow Robert's Rules verbatim, that we use it as a guide. Our past practice has been what we are doing right now. I'm asking to change that to allow the student representative to vote when she can vote. I'm not certain what Robert's Rules speaks to when it comes to closed session minutes. I would have a very difficult time believing that in minutes that are not readily available that you would not abstain if you haven't been there for that particular session. So I still hold by my agenda request and my amendment request to put this as an action item.
Ms. Harshman.
I'm wondering why this wouldn't be added to policy BCAD, which is student representative or member of the Board of Education, where it outlines the procedures for the student representative. Why would it not show up there as opposed to anywhere else?
And again, I would suggest that the motion we have on the floor right now is just to put this item for action further on in the agenda, and that would certainly be something that could be discussed at that time. Any further discussion? So the motion is on Mr. Ridenour's amendment to the existing agenda. All those in favor? 4, 5, 6. Opposed? 1, and the student member concurs with the majority. Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. We're now on to the approval of the amended agenda, that Dr. Harding's motion. Any additional changes to the agenda? All those in favor of the agenda as amended? Mrs. Harshman? Okay. Looks like 7-0 with student member concurring again with the majority. Thank you. Moving on to the minutes. Approval of the minutes.
Minutes were included in the board packet for approval. There are minutes of the closed session for Tuesday, October 20th, 2015, and for the business meeting held on that same day, Tuesday, October 20th, 2015.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Harding's discussion on the minutes.
Madam President, I move to amend or to, I move that the make a motion to separate the minutes, the closed session minutes and the business meeting minutes so that the student representative can vote on business minutes at this time.
Okay, just for clarification, the motion is to separate closed minutes from business meeting minutes.
Correct.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Harding's discussion.
Self-explanatory.
Okay, seeing none, the question is on Mr. Ridenour's motion to sever the minutes. All those in favor? 7-0, and the student member concurs with the majority. So we're back to approval of the amended minutes. Any further questions? Comments? Seeing none, I'm
Just
sorry.
a point of clarification,
Yes.
Madam President. Which set of minutes are we considering first?
We voted on, oh, yes, thank you. We are voting on the closed session first. All those in favor? Wait a minute, did you vote or not? I'm sorry.
I apologize.
Yeah,
I
1,
abstain.
2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 on the closed. Those opposed, those abstaining. And Mrs. Harshman, I didn't see you vote on
voted.
either.
I voted for
For-
the minutes.
For the closed. Okay, that's 5. So there are 5 voting in support of the closed and 3 are abstaining. Now we're moving to the minutes of the business meeting. All those in favor? Looks like 1, 2, oops. I'm getting confused here. Okay, 1, 2,
My first
3,
meeting in 3 years.
4.
That's what it does to me.
5. Okay, any opposition? Any abstention?
Yes.
Okay, so we have 5 supporting the business minutes, 2 abstaining, and the student member concurs with the majority. And I hope it gets no more complicated than this as we move forward. Okay, that brings us to the portion of our agenda on public comments. And I have 2 signed up, but I will certainly, once these are completed, ask anyone who would like to approach the board to do so when they're finished. There is a Mr. Roy Grady. Please come forward, sir. Have a seat, speak into the microphone, and you have 3 minutes.
Yes, I sent you an email yesterday regarding a blog that was published last week regarding a letter that you sent to the Herald Mail regarding Woody Spong and his, what you said were sexist comments. Have you received that email?
I don't recall the email at this time, sir, but this part of the meeting is for you
I'm
to
a
make...
taxpayer. Don't I have a right to ask my own questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I have 3 minutes,
But
okay?
this is just for
Let
you
me
to
ask
make
next.
comments. This
Okay,
is not a
let me-
back
there-
and forth.
Hold on. It's my 3 minutes.
You're absolutely correct.
Do you work for the taxpayer, or does the taxpayer work for you? You're running my clock up. Let's go.
Sir,
I don't answer questions. The board doesn't answer questions during public comments. This is your opportunity to speak to us and to
Okay, I
address the
cannot
board.
afford stadiums and education hubs. I can't afford to be buying, salty hot dogs and lukewarm beers and people getting paid just minimum wages. We don't have the money. The south end of Hagerstown has been destroyed by the county and the local government. My neighbors have all left. The houses are abandoned. They're vacant. They're rotted. They're being squatted in. And the property taxes just keep going up and up and up. No matter where I go, City Hall, at this board, that board, this is the way it is. If you don't like it, leave. I'm tired of it. I want some accountability. I have a $4,000 tax bill here. I have gunshots outside my house. It's not safe to go downtown anymore. The public school system has failed. We failed in the marketplace. We failed on the world stage, everywhere. We were losing. There is no more money. I don't have it. My neighbors don't have it. We can't find a job to produce it for you. Okay? We're at wit's end. I want to know where this $4.5 million that's in this whatever discretionary fund that you're in charge of is going to be spent on. We don't have it. I'm a Christian. I don't believe in evolution. I don't believe in Darwin. I don't believe in abortion. I'm tired. I'm sick and tired of paying for it. I want my portion of this $4,000 back. It's an inept government. You're stealing. You're stealing. That's not a sexist comment. All of you. Every time you raise that up and you create another regulation that puts us in the unemployment line, you have stolen from us. I'm telling all of you, you're thieves. I did not invade your life. You invaded my life. Give us the money back. Let us teach our own children. Let us homeschool our own children. Take our own trash, whatever we need to do. We don't need you. You just need to get out of our lives. Now, I want to know, what portion of this $4,000 is mine? And at your discretion, what are you going to spend it on?
Are your comments concluded,
No.
sir? You're at 3 minutes.
Well, I think you took one of them.
You have an additional 30 seconds, sir.
So anyone who questions your accounting is a sexist. How wrong. You've damaged that man. You've destroyed his life. He has to hire attorneys because of malicious gossip. And I want you out of my life. And I want an answer. Election day is coming, and we're going to hold all of you account in blogs, letters to the Herald Mail, protests, whatever it takes. It has to stop. You've destroyed the community.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. There is another person signed up, a Tracy Routes. Thank you. Come forward, please. And you have 3 minutes.
Okay. Madam President, members of the board, good afternoon. I'm just going to read. I would like to request that the board reconsider the professional arts building for our Washington County students. I work with Cynthia Moeller, and I'm a listing specialist. The professional arts building is a historic state-of-the-art building. There are 7 levels, an elevator, and 2 staircases. This building is located on the square of Hagerstown, the hub of the city. It directly adjoins Barbara Ingram School for the Performing Arts, and they both share a common alley. All interior walls were designed to be movable. They could be classrooms, auditoriums, gymnasiums, or cafeterias. This will provide flexible spaces for individual students and their advisors in large and small groups. The property includes the parking lot directly across the street, and Barbara Ingram, we all know, needs more parking. The property is available immediately. It already has a monthly income coming in of over $7,000. There is a lot of vacant office space that can be immediately used or rented to generate more income. There could be grant money available because of its historic value. This building's price is the same as the Bowman building, the building that was going to need to be demolished just to get started. Why demolish a state-of-the-art building that's historic and can be used immediately? On behalf of Cynthia Moeller Sullivan, I urge you to consider preserving this building, give the gift of history to our future generations, teach our children to be responsible guardians of the environment by restoring and reusing. And last of all, use our resources to the best of our ability, stretch our dollar, save our taxpayers, all the while making Hagerstown a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, that's the end of the individuals who signed in. Is there anyone here who would like to come forward and address the board at this time? Okay. Seeing none, there is an opportunity for a response to public comment. Any of my colleagues wish to respond at this time? Okay, moving on to unfinished business. Mr. Trotta, consideration of the second reading of proposed changes to policy IHBA. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The Board of Education approved the first reading of the proposed changes to policy IHBA during its business meeting on October 20th. At that time, there were several questions posed with regard to the proposed changes and the policy. We have provided the members of the board and the superintendent with a memo that provides responses to each of those questions. Since the first reading, we have provided the community the opportunity to offer comments. We have not received any comments. We are requesting the approval of the second reading of policy IHBA at this time, and that policy is entitled Physical Education and Athletic Programs for Students with Disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Is there a motion?
Yes, Madam President, I move for the adoption, first read of policy IHBA entitled Physical Education and Athletic Programs for Students with Disabilities.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Guestford. Discussion? Mrs. Fisher, you want to speak to this?
Basically, we have, first of all, put this policy into the new format that we have adopted about a year ago, I guess. There had been some questions submitted. As Mr. Trotta has explained, there was a explanation for the questions that were asked, included in our packet this past Friday. Basically, it's the IEP or the 504 plan for individual students who require accommodations of some sort would handle the questions that some of my fellow board members have asked of this policy. The only thing that we have added that was basically different, I think, from the policy was on Roman numeral 3 under policy statement and procedures, letter A, the very last phrase, and adequately funded by the board, simply because that is a new requirement of the state.
Very good. Any additional questions, comments on this policy? Mrs. Harshman.
I have a question about that line that was added, the "and adequately funded by the board." Does that come directly from the state, that the wording?
Yes, ma'am.
How do they define adequately?
I think that's kind of addressed in the regulations. I believe, was everyone sent, Mr. Trotta, was everyone given a copy of the regulations?
Just by way of background, and I want to thank Eric Michael and Dr. Pugh for their assistance in preparing the responses that we provided to the members of the board. The Maryland Special Olympics has been involved in this process from the very beginning. They continue to be involved in the corollary programs for disabled students in a very active way. And they were providing funding for the programs during the inception. And as time progressed, those costs were then transferred over to local boards of education, although the Special Olympics continues to provide financial support. In particular, in our county, they fund a stipend part-time position to facilitate the program. The law does not define the term adequate. I would let you know that the costs associated with this program are part of our budget. It is adequately funded, and if you take a look at the regulation, it talks about the costs that are covered. So, for instance, we cover transportation costs, uniforms, any referee fees, any costs that might be associated with providing these students with this opportunity.
So that meets the adequately.
It does. We have not received any concerns with regard to the administration of the program or the level of funding for the program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions, comments? Seeing none, the question is on Mrs. Fisher's motion to approve the second read of proposed changes to policy IHBA. All those in favor? 7-0, and the student member concurs. Thank you. All right, we're moving on to new business, and at the top of that list of 7 items for our consideration is the reconsideration of the second resolution of the Board of Education of Washington County, the Academic Hub. Dr. Wilcox?
Need a motion first?
I didn't know if you wanted to make any opening comments before we put it on the floor for a motion, or if you'd prefer to wait till after the motion.
I prefer to wait till after.
All right. Is there a motion on this action item?
Madam President, I move that the board suspend the second resolution of the Board of Education of Washington County regarding the academic hub and instruct the superintendent to no longer pursue at this time the actions specified in that resolution for him to pursue.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Mr. Gessford? Okay. All right. The floor is open for discussion. Dr. Wilcox, would you like to make initial comments?
I will. I think it's important for our community to know that I believe that our school system has to be really above the fray in most things. I think we have to be leaders, but we also have to know when it's time to lead and when it's time to step back and let the community help define our course. It became increasingly clear to me over time that there was a great division in our community for a variety of reasons. Some folks were concerned about the small learning concept, community concept. Some folks were concerned about local businesses. Others were concerned about our spending patterns and our historic building projects using fund balance dollars. I don't think the public school system should be a part of that kind of division. I think there should be more of a consensus around the projects that we take on. That said, I asked the board, when they were all next present, to consider rescinding the motion. Now, I will say this to all of you sitting here. I still believe in my heart and with my soul and with my financial literacy that this is a great project for Washington County. I think it makes great sense for our kids. I think it makes great sense for our larger community. And oh, by the way, I think it helps downtown Hagerstown. It was never about that. Some have ascribed a number of other motives, that it was the superintendent's plan to fix a project that wasn't well conceived, meaning the downtown Barbara Ingram site. I've never said that. I've never believed that to be true. I think it was designed as an urban campus exactly as it was for the purposes it was constructed. I think hindsight often gives us a different perspective. And so when I saw a number of things happening in downtown, not the least of which was the success of USMH at Hagerstown and their need for additional classroom space, I thought it was time to be active in approaching what would be our next steps for the kids and community at Barbara Ingram. That said, I think we're at that moment in time when we have to simply say, you know what, we need to pull back, we need to rethink, but more importantly, we need to wait for our community to help shape a direction for this project or subsequent projects in the future. So I say that and I turn it back to the board for its discussion on the suspension.
Thank you, Dr. Wilcox. Dr. Hardings, do you want to speak first to your motion, or?
Sure, I'll be glad to. I don't have a whole lot to say. I've made my views on the Academic Hub project clear on a number of occasions, so I won't repeat them here. I continue to think that the kinds of small learning communities that are engaging students in many places, whether it's the IB program or Tech High or the Ag program or the Barbara Ingram School, clearly captures a segment of our students that are hungering for those kinds of environments. I think a place where we can create more of those environments is only makes sense given what we've learned. I don't know how many people have actually been to the Barbara Ingram School. I took a group on a tour there last Monday. Anybody who goes on a tour of that school and walks through is immediately struck by how engaged the kids are. It's quiet, except for the singing and the music that you hear. The kids are respectful. They're all engaged in what they do. I could say the same thing about Washington County Technical High School. The kids there want to be there. They're enthusiastic. They are committed to their tech areas. They take pride in what they do. They have energy every day in school. You could say the same about the Ag program. You can say the same thing about the IB program. And given the number of students who are asking to be in these programs, I think it's clear that it's what students want. And it's what I happen to believe is the direction that we're going to have, that we should head down the road. That's not to say that we don't need comprehensive high schools. I have a son in a comprehensive high school. He loves it there. And a lot of students do. But a lot of other students don't thrive in those communities and might prefer to have options like this. So that's the primary reason that I supported the project. However, I think the superintendent's right that there's frankly, I haven't heard the kind of support from this community from the constituents that I thought would support this that I expected. I've heard a lot from people who oppose it, but I really haven't heard from the people in this community who I thought would be natural constituents and supporters of this kind of concept. And I can't ignore that, or at least I will choose not to ignore it. I would say to those who oppose the project, and I've heard many reasons and I appreciate and respect them all, that this project has been discussed by this board for over 2 years. It was first discussed at first brought up at a work session on the Educational Facilities Master Plan almost 2.5 years ago. We've had multiple public meetings talking about it. We've had meetings with commissioners. We've had meetings with the city. We've had meetings with the developers. We've had all kinds of discussions. We've approved 2 educational facilities master plans that have this concept in it. And I would just make a request to those who oppose this project or may want to oppose projects in the future. If you had been as vocal 2 years ago, or even a year ago, in opposition as you are now, you might have saved us, the staff, and some members of the business community here a whole lot of time. Because I didn't hear much opposition at all until the last month and a half. So again, I respect the opposition, and by virtue of my motion and my vote, I hear it, and I'm going to vote based on it. But I would just request that in the future, if there's opposition to a project of this sort, let's hear it at the beginning rather than after we've dedicated a lot of effort and time to trying to bring a concept forward. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. Mrs. Fisher.
I want to thank Dr. Hardings for his comments. It's with a heavy heart that I will vote in the affirmative on this issue, only because, as Dr. Wilcox explained at this time, I guess it's the right thing to do. However, our students at BISFA deserve equity. They deserve equity with the rest of the students in our district who attend schools with the necessary facilities. I also am saddened by the loss of a facility that would allow for additional small learning communities that would greatly enhance our students' opportunities. So I will support this vote, but I am very much saddened by the turn of events.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Additional comments before we vote?
Mrs. Brightman, I just have one more before, I'm sorry, if nobody else is speaking.
Yes, I have. Excuse me.
And I'll recognize you after the first round. Mrs. Williams?
Yes, I'm just wondering about the reason for suspending this resolution as opposed to rescinding it or revoking it. If someone could speak to that, I would appreciate it.
Dr. Wilcox?
I will gladly. Given that it also goes on to say that we're stopping to work on it, what it does is it recognizes that an awful lot of time and energy have been put into it. A lot of resources, both intellectual and physical, have been put into this project. And if, in fact, the community said a year from now, after having some deeper conversations with perhaps the Maryland Theater, with other organizations, it would be nice to be able to resurrect the project. But again, that would not come from your administrative team. It would have to come from the larger community, and that's the reason for suspending rather than simply eliminating. It also would give us time, I mean, you heard the young lady here today, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, to explore other properties, to explore other things. Again, only if the community says, take a look at these things. That was the rationale behind my recommendation.
Thank you. Additional questions, Ms. Williams? Comments?
To Dr. Harding's comment about the fact that he wishes that those in opposition had come forward sooner. In hindsight, I wish this board had provided the community the opportunity to talk about this, whether that have been in town meeting, a public hearing, coffee and conversation. Yes, in fact, this has been under discussion for 2 years, and my memory as to how this all came about is very different from that of Dr. Harding's. He said it began in a work session. I remember something differently happening at Commonwealth Avenue in a closed meeting with regard to the situation at Barbara Ingram. And I think it's the right thing to not move forward with this project. I believe that we do need to refocus. I think we need to be looking for a solution to the situation at the Barbara Ingram School for the Arts. I think this can be done without constructing a $15.5 million academic hub. And I look forward to beginning the work on that solution, and whether we want to call it Plan B or just a correction to the situation at BISFA, I think the time to start that is now.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Any additional comments?
Just go ahead.
Ms.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You called him first.
Ms. Harshman.
Okay. First of all, the school was built with, admittedly, materials that were lacking. Apparently, those in the school board position at that time expected later school boards and citizens to pick up the cost for classrooms and a cafeteria. No school should ever be opened without those things. So it amazes me that that even went through, but I was not on the board at the time. Now we need to address those, and I do feel that every student deserves to have the same materials and opportunities, but to put more and more money into fewer and fewer students does not make it justified for those who are in a normal, regular, everyday school situation and are being taught at half the price. So at this time, until, again, we can find other solutions, I am very, very upset to think that our students do not have classrooms. I taught for 30 years. So that upsets me tremendously. But as I said, I had nothing to do with that. So what I do want to ensure is that all our students have an equal opportunity. So I would be interested in looking at possibly something else, but I think we need to be realistic. We have land, we have property, we have buildings that could possibly be converted, and none of those has been considered. So I think that there is a wide range of possibilities to help the students who are enrolled in Barbara Ingram and any other programs that might be put down there, which at this point in time, we don't know what those programs are. We have not been given that information. So again, it would have to be something that would work downtown. I personally would not send my child downtown. I walked through downtown as a child. I was no more than maybe 10 or 12, and I walked home to Garlinger Avenue from the center of Hagerstown with no fear. I wouldn't walk from one end of the block to the other in Hagerstown at night, and I certainly would not want my child there. So I think there are other opportunities. I think there are other things to look at, and I think we need to be vigilant and diligent in what we do. And I think we need to stop trying to accommodate people other than our students and our community.
Ms. Harshman, Mr. Ridenour?
I'm befuddled by the continual
You
statement
have your
of,
mic on. Yes.
last time I checked, of equal opportunity. You know, our schools do not provide equal opportunities across the county. Barbara Ingram, for example, it does not have a football team, basketball team, baseball team, nor do they want one. And consequently, you know, those were, well, keeping that in mind, I will support the superintendent's wish. How many students, though, would, if the hub had been built according to what we were looking at, how many students would we have had downtown? How many students would that have accommodated?
With the hub and all programs, we would have about, if you include 701 and the seats we've created about 850 seats, but about 600 kids downtown.
600 downtown. So it would have been a high school larger than Hancock, larger than Clear Spring, or very close to what Clear Spring has, at $15 million, plus what Barbara Ingram cost, $12 million. For $27 million, we would have been accommodating a school the size, larger than Hancock, close to the size of Clear Spring. Had we built a comprehensive school to house 600 and some kids, it would cost us $50 to $60 million, all in. So it made sense to me. I still support the concept. I will never apologize for supporting small learning communities. I will never admit or tolerate people continually telling me that Barbara Ingram was built shoddily or it was mistaken when it was built. It was a quality effort. It works. We knew when we went in there that we could use the University of Maryland system. We are thrilled that the University of Maryland system has filled up much, much faster than we thought it would when it initially opened. When it initially opened, everybody said, who's going to go downtown to Hagerstown and go to school? Who would do that? Who would send their kid to college in Hagerstown? They can't, they're afraid to walk there. And now we're putting in dorm rooms for the students at USMH. So, was that a mistake? No. The only mistake was we misguessed on how long that space would be available. That's it. No cafeteria. Potomac Heights did not have a cafeteria until how long ago? Or not Potomac Heights, excuse me, Fountain Rock. Which one was it?
Fountain Rock.
Fountain Rock. We finally built them a cafeteria. Barbering kids were fed. Every day they had a hot meal transported in. It wasn't a mistake. And that school was not a mistake. Look at the success rate of that school. Tell me anywhere else in the county where you have that kind of success. That's my challenge. If you can prove to me that that school's a failure, then I will raise my hand tomorrow and say, shut her down. It is not a failure. It is a monumental success. People come in yearly to take a look at it in hopes of modeling it for their own systems. I'm not going to apologize for supporting it. Never. So I will raise my hand in support of the superintendent's efforts. I believe there's been a lot of misinformation and a lot of misunderstanding about this project. It has been around for some time. Just because we didn't have coffee and conversation does not mean people were not informed. There are thousands of other ways to be informed. So, if you weren't informed, shame on you. As a citizen of this county, as a parent of this county, as a taxpayer of this county, get informed. Take the time to find out exactly what's going on in your public school system. Take the time to find out what's going on in county government. Take the time to find out what's happening in Hagerstown. That's your job as a citizen. You elect us to make decisions. We honor your input as we are right now, but take the time to find out what's happening. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Ridenour. Mr. Gassford, I think you're the only one who hasn't had the first go-around. If you,
No, I'm fine.
You're fine. Yes.
I just like to say, as a product of a small learning community, being the International Baccalaureate program, I'm able to see and reap all the benefits that come with that. And I have to say, IB makes for such an incredible high school experience. I have plenty of friends that are involved in various small learning communities, and I just know how much they love them. With that said, I do support the hub, but as Mr. Ridenour or Dr. Hardings had mentioned, getting a clear message from the community is important and hearing what they have to say. So at this time, I will support the suspension, but in turn still support the production of the hub.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Greenwald. Dr. Hardings, you had some additional comments you had?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Sure? Yep. Okay. Then I'll just take my short few minutes or moments, and then we'll go ahead and vote on the item. By suspending this project, by pausing and stepping back from such a polarizing debate in this community, hopefully we can remember that we are a community bound together by our children, by all of our children, and their future. And there's an importance, a huge importance, of trying to find that common cause again and remember to start putting our students and our children first. So with that, the question is on Dr. Harding's motion on the floor. We completed.
No, we went back to Dr. Harding's. I'd like a second time, please. Thank you.
Mrs. Harshman.
Thank you. Also, it was said very clearly by people from the time that Barbara Ingram was built that they knew that materials were not present in the school that needed to be there. They knew there was no cafeteria. They knew that there were no classrooms. And they knew that that would have to be picked up later, as anybody would if you thought just a little bit ahead. The other thing is we had been picking up numbers, I don't know if we still have them or not, with out-of-state and out-of-county students, because we did not have enough county students to go. So we were allowing students from out of the county and out of state to come in with paying a tuition. One thing that is continually left out of the equation is the 72% that the state of Maryland pays for a new high school. So whatever the cost of a brand new high school would be, 72% is paid by the state. That means that we would be paying far less for a brand new high school serving the entire community than we would for one downtown. So I think that's something that often gets left out of the equation. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Wilcox, you had wanted to add.
Just a couple of things. If you take a look at the cost per student at Barbara Ingram and you compare it to North or South High, there are a couple of ways to look at it, and those of you who are business owners will appreciate some of this. If you take a look, because it was non-conventionally financed, that we have a payment of about $632,000 a year going forward over the term of that building. If you factor that in, then the cost per student at Barbara Ingram is about $11,500 per kid. If you take a look at North and South High, about $8,000 per kid. But if you went back and calculated what it cost to put those kids in that building, you would have an inflated number. So what I've done is I've backed out the cost so that I could compare apples to apples and apples to oranges. And when you do that, when you back out the payment, Barbara Ingram is still slightly more expensive to operate because of the adjunct faculty that we bring to support the school. We spend about $8,900 per kid. Now that's in contrast to $7,600 and $7,700 per kid, also about $1,000 difference between a student who's going to a traditional high school like South High versus a young person who goes to Barbara Ingram. And almost all of that can be attributed to the adjunct instructors that we provide and the costs of some of the rentals that we have, for example, with the Maryland Theater and other things like that. The last thing I would say, and Mrs. Harshman is correct, at least in part, if we were going to go out and build a new high school, the funding mechanism set up for us right now is about 71% from the state, 29% from the locals. But what that really plays out to is, as you build a new high school, is something very different, because in the state funding formula, they don't account for the purchasing of the land, they don't account for the purchasing of the architectural and design, the engineering drawings. They don't include any money for infrastructure like running water, sewer, gas to the facility. So in reality, it's really closer to a 50-50 split on those types of projects. Again, we were not looking at any state funding in the Barbara Ingram, in the academic hub piece. Did I say hug piece? The hub piece. So her point is well taken, because we weren't looking for state funding. But the reality was it wouldn't be a 70-20 split or a 70-30 split. It's more like a 50-50 split when it's all done. Even so, I think it's important to reemphasize that the lack of understanding around the financial models, as well as some of the challenges that we face just in terms of opposition. Most of you are here with the earlier speaker today. I think you know, as an administrative team, it's time for us to say, you know what, let's stop, let's rethink this, let's build more consensus around a different model if that's in fact the case. I just thought it was important that we get some numbers out there, because one of the things that's kind of doomed us a little bit is people haven't really understood the numbers, and quite honestly, that's my fault as a superintendent. That's my job, to communicate those kinds of things. To Dr. Harding's point, I wish some of you would have been here 2.5 years ago when we started this conversation, because I think we've talked a lot about the numbers, and there wouldn't be that if people would come. But I also understand people are very busy. People have other active lives, and quite honestly, not everybody is as plugged into the school system as I am. This is where I make my living, so I want to just leave it at that.
Thank you. Okay.
Do you want to say something?
The additional, since we're back around again?
I don't really count in that equation, by the way.
Of course not.
Okay.
We know that. Mrs. Fisher.
I would like to read, if I may, from a part of a letter to the editor that appeared, I believe, November 2nd. This is from a lady I do not know. I've never even heard of her. Her name is Barbara Vance. She is from Washington County. Our small, mostly rural county has the chance to take a national stage, leading the nation in a unique vision for educating high school students and changing the way the students view their schools and their futures. The stage was set several years ago when a handful of forward-thinking people first conceived the idea of a boutique art school in the heart of downtown Hagerstown. Since Barbara Ingram School for the Arts opened a few years ago, it's attracted a national spotlight. In 2014 and 2015, it was recognized for academic excellence, garnering honors as one of the best high schools in the nation. The concept of educating children in small specialty schools goes far beyond this downtown arts school. Small, highly focused schools give us an opportunity to engage children in their own education. It lets them have a voice in what they want to study and who they want to be. Research shows that smaller schools have higher morale and are easier and less expensive to govern. Most importantly, this format moves us away from large, industrial-sized high schools with the inherent problems of drug and alcohol use, bullying, gang violence, truancy, unplanned pregnancy, and failure to graduate. Small boutique schools are personal. Small classes mean lots of time with teachers. It's hard to fall behind with that sort of attention. It's hard not to excel, and that's what makes them extraordinary. I'm hoping the citizens of Washington County will recognize the opportunity that an academic hub of these schools would bring to our economy. It's not just for the Barbara Ingram School. Education is the great equalizer. It puts our kids on the same footing as those from Montgomery or Fairfax counties. And most importantly, it's the only way to ensure a strong and inventive future, a strong, inventive future economy. Investing in the kids of this county not only benefits those children and their families, it ensures that Washington County has a future as well.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Again, the question before us is on Dr. Harding's motion to suspend the existing resolution for the academic hub and instruct the superintendent not to pursue the financial support of that original resolution. All those in favor? Seven zero, and student member concurs with the majority. Thank you. Next item for consideration, Mr. Trotta. the first read to rescind policy IGDD, student performances music.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Pugh.
As part of its comprehensive review of the policies that govern the curriculum, the Policy Committee examined policy IGDD. It's entitled Student Performance Music. It consulted with school staff with regard to this policy and as to whether it was needed. Based upon the guidance provided by school staff, the Policy Committee is recommending that this policy be rescinded. I would point out there is an existing regulation that provides further detail on student performances as it relates to music. At this time, the Policy Committee is requesting the approval of the first reading of policy IGDD. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trotta. Motion, please.
Madam President, I move to approve the first reading to rescind policy IGDD entitled Student Performances Music.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Second.
Second.
Mr. Ridenour. Discussion. Fisher, you want to speak to it first?
I just would like to thank Mrs. Pugh and also our Supervisor of Arts, Mr. Stephen Miles, who joined us in a Policy Committee meeting to consider this issue.
Thank you. Ms. Greenwald?
I was wondering if Mr. Trotta knew the title of the regulation, what the name of it was that encompassed this information. Is it the regulation to this policy?
Yes, there is a
Okay,
regulation that
okay.
accompanies this policy. Yes.
Okay, could not find that.
Yes, Mr. Guest.
I just have a question. What staff was brought on board when they were asking this information, looking for recommendations? What staff are you talking about?
Yes, Dr. Pugh and Dr.
Miles.
Did we go out to the band directors and ask them their opinion about this?
We did not.
Because I spoke to one last night, and he was very concerned that his fellow directors were not on board with this. And I'm just wondering why that would be the case.
Well, let me point out two things. Number one, that there is an administrative regulation that still exists that provides the detail with regard to these types of performances. The other is, after the first reading, we do publish the vote of the board, and we offer public comments. So that if someone does have comments, we always welcome public comments, so I would recommend that those individuals submit comments that would help guide the work of the Policy Committee and also of the board. And that's the purpose of having a first read and then a second read. That is that during that time period, we welcome, unfortunately, we do not always receive public comment. We do on occasion. I really feel like we end up with a stronger decision-making process when we have input, and oftentimes we will modify a document based on the input that we receive from the community.
Well, I don't think our teachers are the public. I think we should be talking to them first because they're the ones that are on the front and have to implement these policies, and they're not happy about it. And I was just wondering if there's a reason for this being brought up. Is there an individual? Is there something that went wrong somewhere that's now we're addressing this?
Dr. Pugh?
No, I think that this was a matter of review by the policy committee, that they were at that point where they were looking at this particular policy and instruction. But to your point, Dr. Miles today has all of the secondary band directors together. He has all of his teachers together, and what he was doing is gathering information on the common practices that people have, because we do have regulations that exist that are older regulations, and Dr. Miles in our discussion said they're not appropriate anymore and that we should really look at them in terms of what people are doing. So I think that's the reason for not having a separate policy just for music, but that teachers will be consulted in what they're doing in practice. And our conversation in that meeting was around making sure that we were clear on co-curricular and extracurricular activities, and that we gave credence to our co-curricular activities, that they be considered very important, and that we provide guidance on them. So there's more work to be done on the side of reviewing regulations. But at this time, they felt a policy that was separate just for music was not appropriate. I believe that's the discussion.
Follow up. I guess my question here is, and maybe a statement, this is basically saying that a student has to now take band, like a marching band, and then you have to take concert band. Is that correct?
No.
Could you kind of give me a little background on that?
No, the way that this policy is written.
The one now, I mean, the one that we're under right now, not this new one. What do we have now? And then what are we changing? Just help me understand that, please.
Yes, currently there is a policy on student performances that require, or that gives credit to the fact that students are expected to participate in outside of school activities, and that it is part of their curriculum to do so. What the regulations have in them is a list of making sure that they get excusal from class, that they get notification from the teacher, those kinds of things, really very operational. It's not about whether or not they participate in marching or concert band. So this policy isn't about how that course is run.
So the new policy isn't dividing it up so the student who wants to take marching band doesn't have to take that second portion of music. They can go into a different elective. Is that
This policy does not address that.
does not direct? Okay.
Mrs. Fisher?
I don't know where that concept is coming from. There's nothing in the policy we want to rescind nor the regulation that mentions anything about a student having to take band and orchestra or anything like that.
It was just brought up last night when I was talking to this person. That was the example that they were giving me. That they said right now they want the student to take a marching band and then a concert band. Now it's being divided that they don't have to take one or the other. They don't have to take both. So he was kind of wondering why we were doing this. I'm just bringing it up because I want to address him with this. So I mean, if it's not, then it's not. I'll just tell him that that's not what they, because he was under the assumption that.
That sounds like a scheduling problem at a particular school. Has nothing to do with policy.
And I would ask, just forward that question to Dr. Miles, and he can certainly provide
I
guidance
think Dr.
on
Miles
it.
was involved in that too. So I will follow up with Dr. Miles on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
You want to look at them. They have nothing to do with it.
Additional questions on this policy that we're considering to rescind? Dr.
I'll just make
Harding.
a couple of comments somewhat related to what Dr. Pugh's already related. I mean, the discussion in the policy committee really was that there are a number of co-curricular things that students are involved in that require their presence or attendance either outside of the normal day or to miss certain of their other curricular activities in order to go to a field trip for a particular program. They're going to miss a number of other classes in high school. And the thought among the policy committee, I think, if I'm capturing it correctly, was that we already have procedures in place for co-curricular activities and the requirements and limitations when students participate in those co-curricular activities. Why do we need one that's completely separate just for student performances in music? Because we thought all of the other policies and procedures that we have that cover those kinds of things should apply to music as well. And that was the approach of the policy committee. It may not be the direction the board wants to go, but that's how we came down where we did.
Thank you. I would just add the policy we're rescinding was last revised or adopted in 1986. So I don't think it reflects current practice. So moving forward, we still have this motion on the table, Mrs. Fisher's motion to approve the first read to rescind policy IGDD. All those in favor? Looks like 6. Mr. Ridenour has stepped out, so it's a 6-0, and the student member concurs with the majority.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you're sticking around for the next, the first reading of proposed changes to policy BCAD.
Thank you. The student representative to the Board of Education requested the policy committee to consider certain modifications to the current board policy BCAD, which is entitled Student Representative to the Board of Education. Public work sessions were conducted on October 13th and October 27th. The student board member was able to attend those meetings and to offer comments to the members of the policy committee. I'd like to outline for you the proposed changes to the existing policy. First, the title would be changed to read Student Member to the Board of Education. In Article 2, the reference to the Student Council's vote taking place in April has been stricken. Article 3D, which addresses the termination of the position of student representative, has been deleted. And finally, a new Article 3D has been added that would authorize the superintendent to promulgate administrative regulations. The policy committee is requesting the approval of the first reading of the proposed changes to this policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trotta. Is there a motion?
Madam President, I move to approve the first reading of proposed changes to policy BCAD entitled Student Representative to the Board of Education.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. A second?
Second.
Mr. Gesford, thank you. Discussion, comments, questions? Mrs. Fisher, you want to speak to your motion?
I think Mr. Trotta has pretty well covered the changes. The only other thing we did, obviously, was put it in the new format. The reason for omitting Roman numeral 3, item D, which has to do with termination, that's up to the student government. It is not up to the board. So we really didn't have control over that. And the student government has changed the election date for the member, so the policy was incorrect in that aspect also. So I want to thank Ms. Greenwald for taking her time to attend our meeting, and I recommend approval of the new policy.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Additional comments? Ms. Williams?
Yes, I'm wondering why Roman numeral 2 background, which lays out the term, lays out how the student member comes to be the student member. Why is that the background, and why is that not the first policy statement? If we are in fact providing for this position of student member of the Board of Education, which is what the purpose says, why would what's in the background not be the first statement of policy?
We certainly can take that back to the policy committee to consider that comment to see whether it should be inserted at a different location.
Okay. May I continue, Madam President?
Yes.
Item C, under Policy Statement and Procedures, the superintendent may grant 1 unit of social studies or community service credit at the request of the Student Board of Education member and upon the successful completion of his or her 1-year term of office. My question would be, why is this not automatic? Why would this need to be the request of the student? If the student has served in this capacity, why would that unit of credit not be an automatic?
Dr. Pugh, do you want to address that?
Sure, thank you. I think it has to do with the fact that it is awarding credit for a compilation of hours and times and experiences that the student member of the board would have had. It is not associated with accredited course that's delivered by one of our teachers, that's assessed by one of our teachers that we have on our transcript. So it's a special credit awarded by request. It's not an automatic.
So I don't understand why the burden would be on the student to request that credit when, in fact, we would have a record of attendance, we would have a record of participation, we would have all of that. Why put that burden on the student?
Ms. Fisher?
I think maybe that's because the student has the choice of requesting that either as a social studies credit or as community service. And that student would have to specify to the superintendent which type of credit they would
So it's
prefer.
It's an either or.
Ms.
or it's an
Greenwald,
or.
That's the way it
like
reads
to
to me
address
as an
that
either or.
question.
I mean, that's not something we had really mentioned when going through this, but I mean, that would definitely make sense to have it as an either or, depending on the request of the student member. Definitely something I would support for sure.
Perhaps the use of the word choice, that the student member has the choice of. I mean, to me, it reads that the only way either one of those can be granted is if the student member makes that request. I see no other mention of any award of any kind of credit for participation in the policy. So I would just ask that that in some way be clarified.
Is there a problem with the student having to make their request? They've got to specify one way or the other anyway.
I think if the policy were to state that this is something that is a result of the student's service, that would be helpful to know.
We can take this forward. Again, as a first read, we're always open to suggestions.
I have one more question.
Yes.
That would be under D. Under policy statement and procedures, the superintendent is authorized to promulgate an administrative regulation to implement this policy. The administrative regulation shall address, but is not limited to, the qualifications, academic standing, reporting, and responsibilities of the student member. So if you could give me an example of what else we would allow the superintendent to regulate. What would be outside of those?
Not sure I understand the question. I mean, well, I shouldn't speak to this. Sorry.
I guess my question is, why do we need that, but is not limited to? What would be an example of something other than the qualifications, the academic standing, the reporting, and the responsibilities of the student member?
I can think of several things. A student might not be regular in their attendance. The student might be someone who had been involved in some type of adjudication. I mean, I think there could be a number of things.
Yeah, and I would just point out from a drafting standpoint, that is language that I included. You can't always anticipate every possible situation that might arise. So there might be a new situation that we didn't think of that arises. Rather than going back and rewriting the policy, we can look at the administrative regulation. Now, having said that, the administrative regulation must be aligned with the policy and be consistent with the policy. And under existing policy, if the Board of Education believes that somehow a regulation, an administrative regulation, does not capture the intent or purpose of a policy, they can request that that administrative regulation be examined. So there are checks and balances in place.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. That's the explanation I was hoping for. Thank you.
Which one mine was it?
Well, there's
kidding. Too narrow.
yours added to it, so thank you too, Dr. Wilcox.
Additional questions? Again, this is a first read. Okay. This is, again, a question of Mrs. Fisher's motion. All those in favor?
Abstaining because I was out during the conversation.
Okay. So that's 6 supporting. Abstention is Mr. Ridenour, and the student member concurs with the majority. All right, thank you. That moves us forward to the consent agenda. Ms. Freeman, welcome.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. 4 procurements are on your agenda this afternoon for your consideration. These procurements were reviewed by the Procurement Review Committee on October 27th. The first is a contract that we've been writing for the last year for our office supplies, recommending that we continue to utilize this contract for 2 more years. The second item is a bid for gas and diesel fuel that was let by the Washington County Government Purchasing Department there on our behalf. Recommending the award of those items to the lowest bidders. Item 3 is an order for some laptop computers and iPad devices. And finally, we have a van on the agenda for our maintenance department. Any questions that I can assist with? I'll be happy to help.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. A motion on the consent agenda, please.
Madam President, move to approve the renewal of the contract for office supplies and services to Impact Office Products in an estimated annual total cost of $515,000, $515,024.58. Gasoline from Mansfield Oil Company of Gainesville, Inc., and diesel from Cato, Inc., utilizing the unit prices from Washington County Government bid number purchase PUR-1297. Laptop computers and devices to Apple, Inc. at $54,170.62. And a cargo van to American Truck and Bus at $40,957.12.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Gaspard. Questions on the consent agenda? Ms. Harshman?
I have a question on the laptop computers and devices. I was wondering how many iPads we currently have in the school system. Do you know offhand?
I don't have that information.
Arnold stopped up and I told him I thought I could handle the questions today and Mr. Corns isn't available. I think it's around 8,000, but we can find that exact information. We just actually completed the inventory of iPads. We have iPad 2s, iPads 4s, and Air iPads. And I have the totals by school. I just don't have the grand total listed in the document that actually Mr. Hammond just sent me today. But we'll have that available for our meeting on December 1st.
Mr. Hammond's coming.
Coming right behind
All
you.
right, he might know it right off the top of his head. I actually have the spreadsheet in front of me. If I can do a little math here, I might be able to come up with the exact number.
7,640.
Additional question, Ms. Harshman?
And is that including these, or
No,
that these would be added on?
be in addition
Okay.
to those.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Yes, my questions are with regard to the iPads as well and the laptop computers. The chart, the proposed purchases Apple Computer Inc. chart that we were given in our packet, it shows that some devices are going to teachers, English language learner teachers. And am I to assume then that all others not designated as going to teachers will be for student use?
The ones that are going to the teachers, it's my understanding there's a new ELL test, and I think they're trying to give 3 iPads per teacher so that they can administer the test for ELL students. So I think establish a baseline and continue to measure, where they are and what support they need. The MacBooks, I know there's 7 MacBooks that are going to PPWs. Their PCs are currently very old and need to be replaced. 3 are gone to the Family Center. I think that covers the majority of them. I think the Snyder grant from Clear Spring, the school is actually purchasing 30 devices on their own at Clear Spring High School. I think that's itemized there. I think there's one other I'm missing, Arnold.
English language learners.
I think that was for the testing of the ELL. Oh, and the teachers, I'm sorry. Did that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay.
MacBook Air laptop computers for the 5 designated Apple schools. What are those 5 schools?
Rattle those off.
Cascade, Morgansville, Old Forge, Smithsburg Elementary, Fountain Rock Elementary.
Thank you. And then I have just one more question. When we purchase iPads and they're sent to the receiving schools, what do the schools receive? Just the iPad? Is it a package? Do they receive charging cords, protective covers, earbuds, or is it just the device?
They receive the device and the charging cords that go with it and a protective case.
But they do have a protective case that students, and that's a covering that covers the screen, or it's...
There's 2 different types in the elementary schools. They're a heavier, kind of a spongy case, and you can they'll actually bounce, which really protects them well. For the secondary schools, they're a thinner case, still with the protection.
Okay, so that's all part of the package and all part of the price. Okay, thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Additional questions, comments on the consent agenda?
I have one question.
Yes, Ms. Hirsch.
Can the iPads be used for the park assessment?
Yes.
They can. So that has numbered our availability for those so that we maybe are not so far behind with.
Right. What they have asked is that we have an external keyboard. Last year, the keyboard actually had to be attached to the iPad. Now I understand they'll also allow for Bluetooth keyboards to be used this upcoming year, something that was just shared with me recently. But the iPad can be used if it has an external keyboard.
Thank you.
Seeing no additional questions, the question before us is on Mr. Ridenour's motion on the consent agenda. All those in favor? Looks like 7-0, and the student member concurs with the majority. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Dr. Pugh, you seem to be spending a lot of time up here this afternoon.
I saw my name on there.
There you go. It must be the high school program of studies update.
We're here this afternoon to ask that the 2016-17 program of studies, which was shared with the Board of Education on 10/20 and discussed in our Curriculum and Instruction Committee on 10/27, with final changes forwarded to the board in their packet for this week on 10/30. We are requesting approval of the 2016-17 program of studies for high schools.
Thank you. An action item. Need a motion on this?
Madam President, move for approval of the program of studies as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Harshman. Questions or comments?
I have a question, and it makes me think maybe Mr. Gesford and I talk to different people. So it's one of the questions I was going to ask. You sort of led into it earlier. The question I get frequently, and I look through the fine arts course descriptions, particularly regarding band, and just scrolling down to it here. Yes, band. It was sort of the opposite of what Mr. Gesford was hearing. Is I get questions from a number of parents about why it is that a student cannot take just one semester of band rather than 2. So, for example, you have a student who likes to march, so they want to be in marching band in the fall, but don't want to be in concert band in the spring. Or in the alternative, you have a student who maybe is involved in a sport in the fall and doesn't want to commit the time that goes into band camp and some of the other things in the fall, but having taken music through elementary school and middle school, would really like to continue playing and would like the opportunity to be in the concert band, say in the spring. And right now, it seems that opportunity is not available. I know parents have asked the question. They've received a number of different responses. One is, you can't give a student a full credit for one semester, which I get, but it seems like there should be a way to solve that problem. If you take 2 semesters in different years, you get 1 credit for it. That seems like a bureaucratic answer that ought to be able to be solved. Other responses they've received are, well, if the kid doesn't learn the music in the fall, then they're not going to know it for the spring when the concert band comes together. And of course, the parent then responds to me, well, what about the kids in the Rifle Corps who pick up their instrument when they go back to concert band? They didn't learn the music in the fall either. I'm just having a hard time explaining to parents why we don't allow that. And it seems like the program of studies is the opportunity for me to ask that question.
Sure, it is. It's set up the way that it is based upon the input of the teachers and the instructors who were setting up the courses, given all that they needed to cover prior to their adjudication opportunities. So it's set up right now as a year-long course. And in that course, the students do 2 different things. They do the marching band and they do the concert band. And the sort of assessment that they have, the outside external assessment that they have of the total band is in the spring, which is when we have the concert band. So I think the effort was to maintain a full band year round so that they had all students and had all that time to prepare for their sort of final exam in that program. That's the answer of why it is the way that it is and why it appears the way that it is in the program of studies. I've dealt with this question several times as a principal in the past, and what we're trying to do is err on the side of the student. If we have a student who participates in the first part of the course but needs another course that would butt up to it, we've allowed that to happen. So it's sort of an exception piece. It's not purposefully set up so that we have 2 separate bands. Quite honestly, there just aren't that many students in the schools to fill both sections and be prepared for their state adjudication, is what I'm told by my band directors and Dr. Miles.
I guess we'll let that play out through the parents who continue to ask the questions and the band directors and the administrators who make those decisions.
Well, if you hear of specific things, then I can certainly help.
I do. There are a number of, and I can refer them to you next time I'm asked the question.
That would be great.
Because there's, again, they say, well, what about the drum major who doesn't play their instrument in the fall? Right. And then they pick it up in the spring. Right. So
logical.
And they're trying to understand the logic of it, and I'm trying to explain it to them when I frankly didn't quite understand it myself. But what you've said is helpful. I would encourage us to keep thinking about it because it seems to me if you're erring on the side of students, you provide as many opportunities for the students to study what they want as you possibly can. But I understand there are other considerations for band directors and administrators, so I do appreciate that. Thank you for the response.
Ms. Greenwald.
I'm on page 31 right now, and I was reading about IB Psychology SL. One of the prerequisites says to have honors local, state, and national government, or AP government and politics, at North Hagerstown High School. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this wrong, but why is it a prerequisite to have to take those courses at North High? Even though the IB program is at North High, some students come from other schools and come during their junior year. They might not come as freshmen and sophomores. So why would that be a prerequisite?
I think at this point it's because they're offered there, but it would also be because the students who are part of the IB program are accepted in early. So they are accepted in 9th grade and participate 9, 10, 11, 12. But we do accept students who transfer in later who would like to participate in it as long as they have the AP. So is your recommendation take North High off?
Yeah, that would be a recommendation.
We can consider that.
Good feedback. Thank you. I have a short question if none of my colleagues have a question right now. On page 11, under Washington County Tech High School, again, one of our small learning communities. They have 18 programs at this point. Looking at environmental studies 1, it's in red in the right column. Again, similar to Dr. Harding, someone asked me about this and I didn't have the answer. I thought I did, but so I'm checking it out with you. My understanding from the conversation is this is a pilot program. It's the second year of a 2-year pilot, and it has an articulation agreement with Towson. Am I thinking of the same one? And that there was some concern about there not being enough students interested in the program at this location. Can you give me a status update on that?
Sure. We have, first of all, the reason that the title is in red because it's a state name change. So the state has changed the name of their program before, I can't think exactly what it was, but it was an environmental studies course. We are looking at implementing this first course of a 2-course sequence next year, beginning at Tech High, and opening it up as well to students who are attending Antietam Academy who need to have, and Evening High, who need to have those completer credits. So that's how we're addressing the small enrollment that it's currently enjoyed.
But that is the one that's a pilot program,
Correct.
a 2-year. I wanted to be sure I had the right one in mind. The other part of this conversation was sort of a general philosophy that seems to be that the local system may not be quite aligned with the state, that locally we're discussing consolidating ag programs rather than having opportunities in various schools, that there was some decision or discussion about consolidating them in only 1 or 2 places. Whereas when that's checked out at the state level, the state seems to be saying, no, we're not promoting that, we're not asking that, so it seems to be a local determination. Can you help me understand the thinking behind that?
Sure. I think what you're referring to might be that we have looked at the schools that have different programs and asked them to consider specializing, if you will, because there's a general ag program and then there are some of the animal sciences and the plant sciences. And when we're looking at forward thinking, how are we going to move the school forward, we were talking to the teachers about what they intended future vision, and their response was that we'd need all 3, because general ag serves a different purpose and is for different students, and the animal science and the plant sciences are highly specialized. So I think that was an early discussion about where the program intended to go and what their visioning was for the future. We are taking a comprehensive look at all of the programs to make sure that we are attracting enough students to make it a sustainable program, so that we're making smart decisions about where to place teaching staff and programs where there are interests. So it's really more part of an information gathering at this point than a move to change programs.
And I appreciate that, and where this conversation originated, I was at the Ag Center yesterday with Congressman Delaney's works session there, and Secretary Vilsack was there, I had several people come up to me and say, we're concerned about the ag program in Washington County school system. And so I just share that with you because I know we want to be responsive to the community, as we were earlier this evening, and thoughtful about what the community feels and thinks about the school system. So I just share that whether it's a misunderstanding or just a discussion that maybe is misconstrued, but there seemed to be a lot of angst about the direction that we may or may not be taking.
Okay, I can
Not to be
follow up.
argumentative with my board chairperson, but I was at that same meeting, and people thanked me over and over again for being the first superintendent that they could remember who attended that meeting, and they were proud of our ag programs and appreciated all the FFA kids that were there. So we were running in a different crowd yesterday, but I understand what you're saying.
And I agree, the pride was there, and they were certainly, those blue jackets were there, and the discussions were more in the side discussions of, we're concerned, we want to be sure there's continued support.
And I would just say, continue that conversation, funnel that through George Phillips, supervisor of the Career Technology Education, and myself, so because we do intend to fully support it. So,
perfect. Thank you. Additional questions, comments? Okay, the question is on Mr. Ridenour's motion regarding the approval of the 2016-17 high school program of studies. All those in favor? 7-0, and the student concurs. Thank you, Dr. Pugh.
thank you.
Okay, and you're going to stay right there again, aren't you?
That's right.
All right. The next item, and this again is for formal action, is based on the work session that we had regarding House Bill 452, Chapter 421, where the state has asked us to respond to the report that all county school districts made a survey of their assessments, mandated state and local assessments, and trying to get a handle around whether we're testing too much, too little, what it looks like, and how we're adjusting. I did send out to my colleagues an additional piece of information. The Federal Department of Ed, after our work session, had sent some, not exactly a dear colleague letter, but a direction and guideline as to what they would see, how we look at testing going forward. So, as promised by Dr. Wilcox, Dr. Pugh, and myself at the end of the work session, I attached a letter for our consideration today. And again, it's a draft, and we're looking for feedback, the three of us, if we can answer any questions. There is a deadline of receiving this letter at the state board by November 30th. So with that, I would just open it. We'll start with a motion, since this is an action item, with the intention that this is a draft letter, and we're certainly open to amendments or adjustments to it. So with that, is there a motion?
Madam President, recommend approval of the Washington County Public School Board of Education comments on the report on state, local, and federally mandated assessments as required by House Bill 452/Chapter 421.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Floor is open for discussion. Ms. Greenwald.
Do you happen to have a copy of the letter? I have the article that you sent and the chart, but I don't have a copy of the draft letter.
Thank you.
Dr. Pugh, do you need one just to take notes on?
Oh, aren't you good?
She's fine.
Thank you. Ms. Fisher.
One concern I had is that while Washington County is within that 2% of student time used for testing, that the study and report don't consider the total effect of testing that has, because students are being pulled from unrelated classes. And then depending on the number of students pulled from an unrelated class, that teacher might be hindered as far as continuing with or moving forward with the lesson plans or curriculum, and therefore, in essence, it may be affecting or causing students to miss more than 2% of class time, though not because they're directly in the testing.
Sort of a collateral
Right.
issue. can you address how we're handling that? I know that's a common.
That was a exact representation of what happens at times. I think to clarify, the 2% was recommended, the federal recommendation was a 2% limit on state testing. So that was not including the local testing. So from my understanding from reading that article, it was anytime you do the PARCC assessments or the kindergarten readiness assessment, that those would be aggregated up to create that 2%. So we're well below that in both state and local assessments together. So there is room for collateral time, but I would say that the teachers do a great job of making alternative plans for their students if the majority of their students are going to be in testing. And where it used to be a fairly large problem when we only had 10th grade English testing and we only had certain classes testing, at this point we now have 10th grade and 11th grade English and math. So it's a more total school approach. So teachers who take in students who are not testing for whatever reason, they do have alternative assignments for the students. So it's not as though the student's not still continuing to work or has a vacation. They're still expected to work and produce work samples during that time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Williams.
Yes. In looking at this letter, I approached it as a teacher might in looking at a response to a prompt. And I want to make sure that I understand, in fact, what the prompt was. We were provided with a report that MSDE put together, which was a compilation of all of the LEAs and their surveys and what they are doing in terms of assessment. So the prompt then, as I understand it, is to make comment and recommendations on that document. Is that correct? On what they presented to us.
The commission is going to make those recommendations. At this point, the local school system is asked to make comments about the survey, yes.
Okay.
Comments and recommendations about the survey itself.
Not ours, but the entire state survey. Is that correct?
Yes, but I do think that there's room in talking with Dr. Smith that there's room for us if we want to put local flavors. If something had changed for us as a system, we could add it to that letter.
Okay, because as I'm looking at this, I see a recounting of what we're doing, and that would have been in what we sent them originally. What I'm not seeing, aside from number 3 and number 5, which are comments, I'm not seeing any recommendations. I see that we're telling them what it is we're doing, but are we, in fact, giving the state what they've asked for, which are comments and recommendations on what, as a state, we should be doing and what the state should be asking of LEAs?
Ms. Williams, if I could step in, I'm just reading from a letter from the State Board and the President of the State Board to Dr. Wilcox and myself, and this might help clarify. It says, thus, we would ask you to review your local survey with your board members carefully to ensure that it accurately reflects the mandated assessments and any information concerning the assessments given in your local school district. So our sense is, and I'm sure there's some flexibility, as Dr. Pugh said, is to look at what we're doing, our best practices, how we're adjusting to some of the obvious concerns about testing and assessments, and then some of the things that were some concerns we might have going forward. So that was the attempt to be reflective. I would also say that there's another bite at the apple. Once the state board comes out with their recommendations, they're going to ask that we once again look at their specific recommendations, then respond to those broader recommendations. So maybe that helps inform your question.
Again, I would just say that I'm not seeing our recommendations. I see an accounting of what we're doing, but I don't see any position or recommendation that we're offering
You
this
have
day.
recommendations of your own, and would you like to bring them forward? Again, this is the opportunity to look at that.
Mm-hmm. It might help if we look back at what the actual commission is going to review. They're going to review how much time is spent testing in each grade. And in fact, they're sending out our data in a new chart that's aligned, because the data, the way it came in, what I shared with you, some school systems put them in based on grade, some of them put them in based on course, so it was a little difficult to make comparative determinations. And so smaller systems who really have done a lot of the work as a system, their percent of time on mandated assessments looks very large, because they do have several district-wide things, because it's only a few teachers working on them. And they were feeling that's unfair comparison to the larger districts. So what we want to do in this is make sure that we're accurate in reflecting how much time is spent testing in each grade on assessments that we are requiring, mandating. There were also, are there tests that are duplicative or unnecessary? I mean, in our review, we didn't find that there were tests that were redundant, but we certainly wouldn't want them. So that could be a recommendation, is to ensure that there's not redundancy. And then they had some other questions here about what Mrs. Fisher was speaking of, negative ancillary effects on instruction, materials, and equipment use in school calendars. So we could add what Mrs. Fisher stated about the negative impact on potential loss of instruction, or at least reorganization of instruction, if that would be a recommendation you were interested in.
And I would also add, and yes, is that what you're seeing in this letter is a direct result of the work session that we all participated in, based on personal notes that Dr. Pugh, Dr. Wilcox, and I took of that meeting, and are very reflective of the comments that this entire board made at that meeting. That was my understanding. So you had some follow-up questions?
I do. Looking at number 3, the statement is, when combined with state and federal assessments, the total percent of time spent testing is well below 2%, the majority of which is already for state assessments. 2% of what? Is that the total school day, 7.5 hours? Is that the instruction portion of the day? I would like to see some clarification there as to what 2% we're talking about there.
Sure. I think you have a copy of the estimated testing time for required tests per grade. It was a chart that we shared at the work session. At the very bottom, there's a little asterisk, and it states percent testing is based on 6 hours and 45 minutes per day in the middle and high school, and 6 hours and 30 minutes per day in the elementary for 180 days. So that is the total day.
Okay. Thank you, Tina. Looking at number 4, the phrase, for high-achieving students who opt to participate in courses that require an assessment, such as advanced placement and international baccalaureate, the local formative assessments are designed to promote discussion, and so on and so forth. Are these the only students that we need to provide with summative assessments? Is that what we're saying there?
You're questioning whether or not the high-achieving students are the only ones who have summative assessments.
It says
the way it's written.
That we're moving away from benchmarks and focusing more on local, and I'm not sure what that means, local formative. Does that mean teacher-made or ones that we pick and buy, purchase? While understanding the need to continue to provide summative assessments for high-achieving students, that to me sounds as though those are the only students that we're providing summative assessments, and I don't know that that's what.
I believe that was based on a comment where we were talking about needing to be sensitive to all students individually, our high-achieving students, as well as some of our students who are more challenged cognitively. Now, if we need a comma here or there or clarification, but again, that was directly from the work session comment.
Do you understand what
I do. I think it looks like we're only providing those as end assessments for high-achieving students, when really what we were trying to say or capture was that high-achieving students do have AP and IB assessments.
Right.
So, okay.
So
we're happy to rework that for clarification. I think the intent.
Okay. And there are a few little things like in number 3, I think we're missing an S on WCPS in the second sentence. And I think the pronoun in the first paragraph should be its instead of their. That's little things like that.
We'll do that.
Little tweaks.
We'll do that wordsmithing thing.
Little tweaks.
There are grammatical corrections. Okay, additional questions or comments? And taking those into consideration, may we move forward with Mr. Ridenour's motion to accept this approval of this letter of comment on assessments. All those in favor? Looks like 7-0, and the student is absent at the moment. All right. Thank you. All right.
Stay right there, Dr. Pugh.
Well, no, we have a number 7 first. We have the minutes that we were going to be discussing, I believe, as an action item today. And Mr. Ridenour, that was based on your motion. If you would like to lead off with the discussion, and I believe Dr. Harding seconded that motion.
Well, if you could you read the motion, or you want me to reread it? As I stated to you, to separate, I think it was to separate or segregate.
It was separate closed from business, correct?
He doesn't have his mic on, and I can't hear what he's saying.
I don't know.
President, just from a parliamentary point of view.
Yes.
This motion before was to amend the agenda to set this on the agenda. If he wishes to make a motion now, I think he needs to state the motion so that we
That's
can
what I
consider
wanted to be
it.
sure of, Dr. Hardees. Thank you. So I would move that, move to separate business meeting minutes from other minutes where the student representative does not have a vote.
Does not attend.
Did not attend, excuse me.
Okay. Everyone understand the motion? Thank you for the clarification. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Now we're open for discussion.
It's very simple. That purpose of this is to allow for a vote that would basically say to the agenda committee, we'll separate out these different types of votes so that the student will have the opportunity to vote on those minutes where she attends the meeting.
Very good. Thank you. Any additional questions, comments? Ms. Fisher. Whoops.
I don't know if I'm getting picky or not, but do we need to add something to this motion to say going forward or in the future? This might sound like we're only talking about today's meeting.
A permanent change in the way that
That's
we
what
handle
that
minutes.
was what I was looking for.
Someone else?
You need me to restate
Does
it?
everyone understand the motion that Mr. Ridenour has made to sever the business minutes from any other minutes that the board member does not attend? And this will be a permanent arrangement for the minutes going forward. Okay. All those in favor?
President.
No,
Whoa.
I have to change it. It
We
would have to be-
understand, but there's still discussion, I would hope.
Will be.
Sorry, I thought we had already finished discussion. Well, I'm sorry.
Does Dr. Hardings need to withdraw his second before I alter the motion, or
He can.
I don't know what the correct parliamentary.
I'll withdraw the second if you need to restate the motion.
Do you need to
Just
restate it?
just add to at the beginning, going forward. The minutes will be separated. The closed session minutes will be separate from those minutes that the student representative does not attend.
Okay.
Going forward.
Second.
Second. Is there an understanding of the motion as stated by Mr. Ridenour at this point? Is there a discussion? Mrs. Williams.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I have absolutely no problem with the student representative having a vote on the minutes. I would like to understand why, up until now, the student representative hasn't been able to vote. I don't understand the history. And the way this all came about at the last meeting, I was approached and told that Mr. Ridenour was going to amend the agenda to allow for the student representative to vote on the minutes of the meetings that she attended. And at the time, I was prepared to suggest that since the minutes don't appear as a consent agenda item on anything we're given on the agenda, I'm merely handed a sheet of paper that lists them. So I was ready to say to Mrs. Brightman, who approached me, I have no problem with reading these individually. But that's not the way this was going to play out. So I think this is something that doesn't need to be done. I shared what's in Robert's Rules of Order. I think it's a given that the student representative can vote on the minutes of any of the meetings according to Robert's Rules of Order. And I just think I don't understand why this has all of a sudden become such a big deal and why it was done the way it's been done for as long as I can remember.
May I respond?
Please,
History?
please.
Sorry, Mr. Ridenour.
History is simple. We use boilerplate agenda protocol for our meetings. We've always had a standard alignment of how things are presented. The Pledge of Allegiance, the moment of silence, approval of the agenda, approval of minutes, those boilerplate things that we do each and every time that we have a meeting. Okay? It came to my attention that from Ms. Greenwald that she could not vote because those minutes were together. Now, my interpretation of Roberts might be different than yours. I don't know if Roberts takes into consideration closed session minutes or private minutes in their statement of you can vote on any minutes even if you're not there. Sometimes, and again, since we're using Robert's Rules of Order as a guide, not an absolute, we have followed this and we have, past practice has been that the student does not vote on closed session minutes. She does not vote on personnel actions. These are things that she does not have the authority under our rules to vote on. So when she asked me to do that, I said, this seems simple. I'll make a motion to amend the agenda so that we can have those minutes split. I didn't get a second, so consequently we moved here where I hoped people would reconsider their vote and go along with separating this. It's simple. Whether Robert's rules say you can or cannot do it, since we're only using Roberts as a guide, this is a simple thing to do. Give the student the opportunity to vote on that which we believe, based on past practice, she should and could be voting on. Simple. As far as I'm concerned.
Madam President, can I invite the student board member to comment? Because she first reached out to me a few weeks ago with a question about the way we've always done the minutes in the past, which I think speaks directly to Mrs. Williams' question. So I think if the student member could share that conversation and her perspective on it, it might help clarify some of the misunderstandings.
So I had first gone to Dr. Hardings to ask him, just because he was so versed on this, the reason why I was voting on minutes that I knew I would never be able to attend from just observing past board practices where when members aren't at meetings, they typically don't vote on the minutes. I was a bit confused of why every meeting I was voting on minutes I knew I would never be able to attend. So that's why I had asked Mr. Ridenour to make the motion for me, because I am unable to split work and closed and then business, so I would be able to abstain from closed and work session minutes. And I, of course, in turn was not asking for the weight of my vote to change. it would still be, if everyone on the board were to support it, it would still be 7-0 student concurs. I wasn't asking for a full vote or for my vote to change whatsoever. I was just asking on the way, I was asking Mr. Ridenauer to make the motion to split the way we had done it, just because I was voting on minutes of meetings I would never be able, in this leadership or in this scenario, whatever, that I would not be able to attend.
I have
Does that clarify?
a question in terms of why things have been done.
Okay, Mrs. Harshman had her hand up.
I just was not sure either why this is an issue. There isn't any reason for those to be brought before the board for a vote together. And if that's the case, why do we have to vote on it? All we need to do is, as they're presented, present each one separately and vote. I don't know why we have to vote to change anything. I mean, I think we can just do that as a matter of how we present the minutes.
Just have one more question.
Yes.
And this goes back to past practice. Why are we voting on closed session minutes to approve closed session minutes when we have approved them in closed session? Dr. Hardings, you look exasperated, but if you could shed some light on why we're doing that.
What we vote on are not the minutes of what goes on during the closed session. What we vote on, and you'll recall from any of our closed session, that the president starts the closed session by saying we are in open session, because the meeting starts as an open meeting, which then must be closed by an action of the board. That closing of the meeting and the vote on the closing of the meeting is a public act that has to be recorded and presented to the public, as well as the reasons that the board is voting to close the meeting. And there are 14 in the state of Maryland that you can have. So the minutes of the process that the board uses to close the meeting and the vote to close the meeting are what we have been calling, perhaps incorrectly, the closed session minutes. So that's what is available to the public. And if you look in the minutes that we receive, the public can view the board convened in open session, et cetera, et cetera. The board voted to close the meeting, and then et cetera. So that's the closed session part that we vote on in public.
In public.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's my understanding, too.
Thank you. I
Mr. Trotta
appreciate
can
that.
correct me.
Thank you.
All right.
Madam President?
Yes.
If the board is fine with just making the motions separately in the future, I'm fine with that. I think that's the cleanest way to solve this problem, and then we don't have to pass this motion. That's okay with me if it's okay with our student member. I think she was just looking for, you can tell from our consideration of the student member policy that she's really focusing on her job and really looking at all the details and asking questions about why do we do things this way, and this was something that she came up with, and I certainly want to support her in her efforts to embrace the position and have it really make sense. So if the consensus of the board is that we can consider the minutes on separate votes in the future, then I'm certainly fine with that. I think that's the cleanest, easiest solution. I think probably what happened, and it's probably my fault because she asked me what she should do about this, and I said, well, just ask a board member to separate the minutes. And probably I didn't communicate that well enough to my colleagues, and that's probably what led to the confusion last time, and I apologize to all of you for that. I was simply trying to help the student member achieve what she was trying to achieve. So I'll take the blame for the confusion, and if we can all agree that that's how we're going to move forward, I think maybe I'll withdraw the second from the motion. If Mr. Ridenauer will withdraw the motion, then we can all proceed as we've sort of agreed.
Ms. Greenwald, are you comfortable since this was?
Certainly, yeah.
Now, explain to me exactly how we're going to do it going forward.
Whoever makes the motion on the minutes will just make separate motions for each set of minutes to be considered.
Okay, I don't, fine. All this is asking is to make sure that happens.
Yes, sir. Right.
So if I withdraw the motion, you withdraw your second, and we don't vote on it, there is no guarantee that the minutes would be presented in that way. You can laugh and you can chuckle. It's a simple motion.
you can have the paper and you can make the motions then to guarantee then that it
All I'm
happens
saying-
that way.
You talked about past practice a couple of minutes ago.
Yes.
You know, I studied a lot of history and studied a lot of government. Past practice plays an important part in the law. If there is not a law written specifically to an issue, lawyers and judges are going to look at past practice to try to make a determination as to how to move forward on an issue. So, past practice had it, everything together. Simple as that. And that's fine. I was fine with that until I was asked specifically, let's see if we can fix this. So my motion was to fix it, to make sure it's fixed, that it stays fixed until the majority of the board decides in the future that they want to change. That's it. If they do that, fine. Fine. I just want to make sure that going forward, we've made a determination that this is what we want to do. It doesn't matter who makes the motion. You know, it just, I just want to see it codified, so to speak. That's all. So it's up. It doesn't
Point well
matter to
made,
me.
Mr. Ridenour. I think we're all on the same page at this point. Is that the hope? Am I seeing some general agreement? Okay. All right. Moving on. Everything you've withdrawn? Your
No,
motion?
He wants a
No.
vote. He wants a vote.
You're calling for a vote.
If Dr. Hardings decides he wants to pull his second, then I don't have a second. I will withdraw my motion. That's fine.
I did withdraw my second.
Then I withdraw the motion. Do it any way you want to do it. Just make sure she gets the vote.
Yes, sir. We will clean up the way it's presented, Ms. Greenwald, on the minutes, and we'll move forward in that way. All right? All right. Dr. Wilcox,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
It's my privilege today to introduce some folks who've been doing some work for us. They are representatives of the District Management Council. I'm going to ask you to come up to the front table. And Nate, I will have you introduce yourself and your team in a moment. But what I'd like to do is provide some context. The board members that we entered into this agreement with the District Management Council to study our practices around special education. All of us have a great interest in better serving our young people in this community. We have a great interest in narrowing achievement gaps. And what we thought we ought to do would begin to build a baseline. So we've asked the District Management Council to come in. They have begun some surveying of our employees to see not only what we do each day and each minute, but are we aligned to get the results that we aspire to? We have done a beginning piece in the surveying and in the looking at organization and alignment. We will take some next steps based on the observations that you're going to hear in a few moments. But I would share with you that we've already begun some work at organizing focus groups, bringing in our educators to make sure that what they said was actually what they do each day. Because oftentimes people take a look at a survey and they interpret a question one way or another. So we want to make sure that we have all of that validated. I'm going to let Nate introduce his team and go through it. And then this is a progress report. It is not an action item to ask the board to do any one thing or another, but we simply want to let you know where we are today. And I believe, Nate, you and your team have already met with some of our employees today.
That's correct.
Team members. So go ahead, please.
Great. Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? My name is Nate Levinson. I'm the president of the District Management Council, and it's our pleasure to be here today. I'm joined by my colleagues, Kriti Parashar and Kristen Keene. What we wanted to do today was two things, actually three things, sorry. One is we wanted to spend a few minutes sharing with you just some of the best practices, some of the guidelines that are driving how we look at serving kids who struggle. So basically, everybody brings baggage to the table. We're putting ours right out there for you. What do we believe the research says? Second, we're going to share with you some very preliminary findings, and I really want to stress that. We're very early in this process of what we've learned so far. And then know that, as Superintendent mentioned, we've got a number of months of going back to check and to process and to continue our learning from your staff and from other stakeholders. And I want to leave some time, obviously, for your questions as well. So we're going to move fairly quickly through those first two sections. What are some of the best practices and what are the preliminary findings so far? And to just warn you that even from our discussions this morning, one of the findings that's in the PowerPoint we're already making changes to, so we'll move through that one even quicker. So the title of this is Improving the Effectiveness, Cost-Effectiveness, and Equity of Serving Struggling Students. And I just wanted to stress, and we'll talk about that in a moment, this is bigger than just special education, and sometimes that gets lost even from the get-go. Right. We're going to where are we in this process? Because I think that's so important. At this point, we've completed steps 1 and 2. They're the earliest steps of the District Management Council, trying to get a sense, a learning and listening about how you're currently serving students who struggle. And now we are in what is a many-month process of sharing back our findings, getting feedback from administrators, teachers, parents, having the data questioned, having people question us as our thinking, and we're learning. So we're still a number of months away from actually having even what we'd call a final set of here's what we think is happening, and here are some opportunities worth pursuing. Following that, so once we're done with that kind of step 3 of continued the learning, there's going to be a separate process that we will facilitate, your decisions as a district, not ours, as to which of these opportunities are worth pursuing and how and over what time period. Something that I suspect many of you know, making changes to how you serve students with disabilities, how you serve struggling students. It's complicated. There are lots of interrelationships, and the planning for it is significant and needs to be thoughtful and very inclusive. And that's a key part of how we're approaching this work. Oops. Oops. So I want to share, again, just a couple, and there's far more material than we're going to cover here today, so you can read it at your leisure. But wanted to describe, first of all, why we use the term struggling student. It doesn't appear in No Child Left Behind. It doesn't appear in the IDA. But a struggling student falls under a bunch of different categories that may be more familiar to you. It could be students with mild to moderate disabilities. It could be students who are at risk, who don't have IEPs, some English language learners, kids who are struggling to read. And the reason we're combining these in our conversation is because many of the best practices, the things that are going to help one, help all. And quite honestly, that there has been a tendency over the last 30 years to actually separate these students into very discrete ways of serving them and thinking about them, and not always to their benefit. That being said, there are definitely a number of groups of kids whose needs are very unique. Kids on the spectrum, kids who are very new to the country, who have very limited English, students with severe disabilities. Those are very unique needs that will need very unique supports, and we're not suggesting that everything we're sharing today applies to all students. The I for individual and IEP still remains. Oops, sorry. Trying to take what is 20 plus years worth of research and condense it into one page is what you're looking at now. This is are trying to really simplify to the point of discussion what are those best practices that have really helped kids who struggle. And there are 6 components to it. First and foremost is a rigorous general education curriculum. And I can't stress that one enough, because I think sometimes, and I spent 6 years on a school board, so I have sat in your seats, and sometimes...
Condolences.
So sometimes, when you get a presentation and the results for students with special needs isn't everything you hoped it would be, there's often this tendency, you turn your head to the special ed director and you're kind of thinking like, what are you going to do about it? And the first message we want to share with you is helping kids with mild to moderate disabilities or helping kids who are learning English, it's a much larger effort. It is a team effort, and general education has to be a major part of that. And what we're saying is that the general education curriculum has to meet a large majority of the students' needs. Now, it's not going to meet 100% of their needs, but it's got to really meet a very large percentage of it. And general educators are going to be a key player in this work going forward. The second piece, kind of a subsegment within that general education curriculum, is this coordinated and sustained focus on reading. You may already know this. We just want to really highlight it, that if a student struggles to read, they're going to struggle in math, they're going to struggle in science, they're going to struggle in social studies, they're going to struggle their whole life. And again, you'll notice in our nice little graphic, the arrow around reading is inside the general education larger arrow. General education efforts have to be highly effective for the majority of students when it comes to teaching them to read. Again, general education is not the only player at the table, but they need to be a major part of the team. If you do those first two things well, that's still not going to be enough for a struggling student. Almost by definition, a student who struggles means that with a core instruction and the core program wasn't sufficient. Two things have to be added to that. The first is extra time to learn. If I'm a student who struggles, I need more time to master the material than some of my peers who are not struggling. On one hand, a shockingly simple concept, surprisingly complex to operationalize, and not always present in every school. The second thing that's also going to be needed for that student who struggles is that extra help you're going to give me has to be very, very targeted. It means that if I struggle to read and my struggle is in phonics, and maybe my struggle is really not just in phonics but in consonant sounds, the extra help you give me has to be not just in phonics but in consonant sounds. Again, not shockingly crazy, but not always the case, particularly when there's a reliance on purchased programs. So what we're seeing in places that have really closed the achievement gap, raised achievement, the extra help is part of extra time, and that help is very, very personalized to exactly what my struggles are. All of this is underlaid by the fact that the core instruction, the reading instruction, that extra time, those targeted interventions, all of it has to come from teachers who are very skilled, highly trained in the material they're teaching, and very fluent in the content they're teaching. Simply said, there is no substitute, there's no program, there's no schedule, there's no workaround to the importance of the teacher who is providing both the core instruction and the extra help. Simply put, the teacher matters more than everything else. And again, we never want to lose sight of that, even though it is not a shockingly crazy idea. And then lastly, for these 5 components to work well, you need some data to tell you what am I struggling in, who is struggling, some data to tell you whether the interventions you're doing are effective or not. Just to follow up on your earlier conversation, you do not need new assessments and you do not need additional testing. You've got plenty. But you want to make sure that the data you have is deeply integrated into this cycle to ensure that all these efforts are being effective. That at a very high level is the thinking, the research I've shared with you, and we will skip all of these particulars for another day. A ream of the academic research that supports those best practices, And it's interesting, one of the nice things about this work is this combination of all this academic research has also been borne out by real-life school districts, real-life kids, real-life teachers who have implemented these things and implemented these practices well, and have seen very substantial gains in student achievement, student independence, college-going rates, graduation rates. So there is a large body of evidence, both academic and actual, that says if you can do these things, some really good things happen. Moving to, what am I doing? Okay, this is very strange because you're moving and I'm not. Okay, it just caught up. So let me just, so if we transition from, that's kind of a big national picture of what works. I wanted to talk about now, what did we see so far, our initial thinking here in the district. And this is a good news story primarily. So I want to just put that right out there. We have shared these kind of results with 100+ school districts across the country. It is not all that often I get to say that many of these ideas are already in place in the district, and we're really talking at its largest level about how do you take much of what you're already doing and many of the things you already want to do and do them a little better, do them a little more consistently. But those best practices that I shared with you are best practices that are believed by many in the district. Those best practices drive many of your plans. So one of the nice things that I get to say this afternoon is that we're starting from a position of strength, and it really, we're not suggesting a radical alteration to your plans, but rather at its highest level suggesting a very deep look at the operationalization. How do you operationalize many of the things that we know and your leaders and your staff know as well? We saw a lot of strength here. The district and the staff have a huge commitment to students, to a really nice balanced commitment, both academically, socially, and emotionally. I said how important reading is. Your staff already know that and take that to heart. We've said that how important extra time is, and for certain groups of kids at certain levels and in certain schools, there's a lot of extra time. And so, the question will be, how do you make that available for even more students, all students who need it? You've already taken steps to help ensure that your special education staff have that expertise. And again, there are some logical next steps down that path. You've got a lot of programs to help kids with the more significant needs, which is great. And overall, the district is identifying students with disabilities at a reasonable rate. So again, there's a lot of good going on, and the core of your approach is very much aligned with best practices, something that we say in probably less than 10 or 15% of the districts we work with. So a very good place to begin. A number of opportunities that I do want to share. The first one, which I've already alluded to, and this is probably the biggest, is to consistently implement the current district-defined plan for supporting struggling students, both with mild to moderate disabilities and without IEPs, throughout the district. And this is that opportunity to take the best of what you're doing and make sure it's happening in every classroom, in every school, for every student who needs it. And there are a number of reasons that we don't see that happening. It is not because people don't want it to happen, but as I mentioned earlier, it's a logistically complex organism, a district this size. And I think working with both teachers, principals, and central office administrators, we can help map out where those friction points are and map out a plan to spread these best practices very widely through the district. when we've talked about the importance, and I saw a few heads nodding when I said how important the teacher is. I mean, nothing is actually more important than the skill, training, background, and effectiveness of the teacher. One of the things that's so unique about special education is the incredible variety of things we ask special educators to do. That in some districts, that is manage IEPs, manage behaviors, know the law, be good at running meetings, be excellent at working with parents. It is also to know math and English and science can be social, it can be biology, and it can be earth science. A range of activities that no other person in your district is asked to do. It is a lot. And there are, as we think about how important it is that everybody be excellent at what they do and well trained at what they do, one way of making that more likely is to allow staff to specialize to some degree. Am I a math person? Am I an IEP management person? Am I really good at helping kids learn to read? Don't necessarily expect me to be good at everything. It's an awful lot. The district already does some of this. Again, way ahead of many of the districts we work with. But it doesn't happen all the time. And part of the way the district's operationalized this idea of being very strong at what I do, you've relied on, as almost all districts have, certification. Because Washington, D.C. says that, if I have a certification in this, I'm good, and if I don't have a certification in this, I shouldn't be teaching it. I tell you, that's not always the case. You've got first grade teachers who are phenomenal at teaching reading, but they may not have a reading certification. You have first grade classroom teachers who will be phenomenal at supporting students who struggle, supporting students with disabilities, but they're not certified. And conversely, I can be certified in a subject, but not necessarily expert at teaching it, especially to kids who struggle to learn. So the idea of taking the specialization that you've already started, making it more regular throughout your schools, and making sure that you're not relying just on certification. We all need to stay within the letter of the law, but sometimes you got to go beyond that to really make sure you're meeting students' needs. The next one. Number 3 is both the most logical extension of everything I just said, and to be quite honest, the one that makes people the most uncomfortable. And this number 3 reads, to consider shifting the role of special education paraprofessionals from academic support to helping students with health, safety, behavior, and severe needs. What we're suggesting is not that paraprofessionals are going to go away. They won't, and they shouldn't. But that if you believe that the quality of the teacher, their training and background is so important, if I'm a student who struggles in math, if I'm a student who struggles to read, having a highly skilled teacher would be the best person to provide that extra time and those targeted interventions. So this is a recommendation that says that for academic needs, certified staff, and not just any certified staff, but highly skilled and highly effective certified staff should be the first line of instruction and the second line of instruction. It also says for social and emotional needs, people like social workers, psychologists, behaviorists, highly skilled, highly trained people would be your best first and second and third line of support. And that the role of paraprofessionals, very important for many students. As I say, part of a balanced breakfast, that they're part of the plan. But we did see that as a district, slightly more reliance, and not in every school either, but slightly more reliance on paraprofessionals than may be to the benefit of all students. Number 4, we're going to skip, because this is one of the ones where I said this morning our feedback session was very, very helpful, and we're going to revisit this data. Number 5 was to think about, and this is again the other side, not your struggling students, but your students who are doing very, very well, but your gifted and talented staff, to think about how they're scheduled, how they're supporting students. No criticism of what they're doing, but our analysis of how they're scheduled. Our belief is they could help even more students, that you have a resource, a very valuable resource that could be used more widely and to help even more students. So let me stop there, at least as an overview, and love to take questions, and if any of your questions go specific, we might turn to another slide or two. But that gives you an overview of where we're at. And again, our next steps is to take this in much more detail to key stakeholders, internally and externally, and get their feedback and modify our thinking as we learn more from them. At 4 o'clock, yes.
So they're actually meeting with another group at 4 today, just to keep refining their understandings.
Questions? Ms. Harshman.
I just have one question about your last statement, which said about the gifted and talented teachers being used for more students. Isn't that putting them out of the reach of the talented and gifted students?
So let me grab if I can find it quickly. Oh, did I go one too far? Oh, so all we're saying here is, and we heard this from some of the teachers as well, that the elementary schedules in particular are a very complicated beast. They're trying to work with students, and what we saw was that on average, the gifted and talented teachers, your GATE teachers, are with students about 50% of their workday. And we've seen in other districts, and this is mostly a matter of scheduling, not necessarily even changing the criteria of who they work with. Any of the services that are scheduled kind of separately or after the fact in a school, in some schools, the schedule is very conducive to them being able to work with as many students as they want, and in others, the schedule kind of fragments their day. So just our thought, it was that by looking very carefully at the scheduling and making sure the schedule is conducive to this, some of your staff could, if there were students who you wanted to serve, could be served without taking away from anybody else.
But do they not have to be talented and gifted then?
I would think you would want them to be, yes.
I would think you would too.
As would I.
Okay, that was a complaint that I had gotten from some talented and gifted teachers, that they were being used in other ways that were not geared toward the talented and gifted students, which I think if you're hired for talented and gifted, you should be doing
Agreed.
Talented and gifted. Thank you.
Mrs. Fisher. First of all, a very minor thing. On page 15, what does FRPL mean?
Free and reduced price lunch.
Oh, I never see it that way. Okay. I agree with what you're saying about the teachers or the specialists should be the ones doing the teaching with, especially our students who are struggling. And there is a role for parapros, but the one thing I seem to see sort of ignored in this report has to do with behavior problems that disrupt the class. And from my discussion with some of our parapros, what I hear is they're usually used to pull those disruptive students out of the class because they have to be out of class, but they still need instruction. It's the parapros that end up instructing those individuals that are causing the problem, so the teacher can actually work with the other ones. But then that child is never going to get the benefit of working with the expert teacher. So how do you solve that?
Sure. So here's it's interesting, and I don't want to suggest this is easy, but I definitely want to suggest it is possible. In the What Works Clearinghouse, which was, this effort by the federal government to identify what really works. They had a lot of trouble finding things that actually worked. Some of the first things they were able to confirm was the science of managing behaviors in schools. It is one of the, just as the National Reading Panel has said, hey, we really know what works around reading, there really is a very well-developed science around managing behaviors. I want to underscore the word science. These are highly skilled people, and what we've seen in districts that have really done a great job with this is, I agree with you that if a student whose behavioral outbursts are disrupting the teacher, the class, and themselves, that everybody loses in that. And doing nothing is a loss, and doing something, i.e. pulling a student out, is a loss for some. What we've seen is this combination, and I really want to underscore that paraprofessionals are very important in behavior management, but in districts that have really done this well, imagine every school of a size having a full-time behaviorist. It's a highly skilled person trained in the managing of behaviors. Every paraprofessional who is working with a student with behaviors reports to this behaviorist. Every day they're being trained and given advice, and this behaviorist is informing and working with the classroom teacher on what are the things that triggers behavioral outbursts. It turns out, unbeknownst to most teachers, they trigger about half the outbursts. I'll give a real quick example of a student who is asked a question. Clayton, how much is 5 plus 7? Well, some students feel like they're being put on the spot, and they need a lot of time to process, and they feel they don't have the processing time. And so what they do is they hit the student, my son, sitting next to him. That's how they respond to feeling on the spot, feeling they don't have enough time. And what districts have been able to do, particularly through the wide use of behaviorists, teach the students how to cope, teach the paraprofessionals how to teach and support coping mechanisms, and to teach the classroom teacher what kind of style and approach for an individual student can minimize these kind of outbursts. It's a very holistic approach. It is generally cost neutral. You need more higher skilled people. You need fewer lower skilled people. You still need a lot of people to do it. But it has been really quite remarkable the rate at which outbursts diminish. And one of the really interesting things about behaviorists and the behavior science is they measure everything. It's a core component of it. So you know exactly whether behavior outbursts have been reduced, you know exactly whether, I used to go 6 hours between leaving the classroom, and now it's 6 days. So that there's a lot to be done. And lastly, just to acknowledge that this is a growing challenge. Virtually every single district we work with are seeing greater behavioral needs. And being a district that can really meet the needs of those students and meet those needs well, it is no longer kind of a sideline to what you do as running a school system. It's really part of your core work these days.
Thank you.
So what we intend to do is continue the conversations. We'll report back to the board again as we get a little further along the road, certainly before we begin to implement any strategies. But we really view this engagement as a long-term engagement with DMC. They provide kind of that outside perspective that I think we sometimes need in order to reorganize ourselves. I think one of the truisms in organizational design and development is it's very difficult for an organization to reorganize itself. It needs a critical friend, a critical partner to say, here's something you ought to look at, here's something you ought to think about. And that's exactly what they're providing us, is good data that we can think about, that we can talk about, and then, again, hopefully formulate a plan for action to improve students' services. So I want to thank you, Nate, particularly for coming in.
I think Dr. Harding said.
Nope, I'm sorry, he's done. Let's move on. No.
Just briefly, I want to thank the superintendent and his team for being willing to engage in this process, number one, and number two, to being willing to engage for being willing to engage in it publicly. Because there are a lot of leaderships of a lot of organizations who would fear having a third party come and sit behind the leadership of an organization and say, here are the things that you can do better. I think if we want to do what's right for kids, we have to be willing to have this discussion, and we have to have it in a very fair way. And I think you've provided us a very balanced and fair assessment of, so far, of what you've seen. And while we will probably spend most of our time on the things that you think we can do better or things that maybe we could do differently to serve kids better, I think we shouldn't lose sight of a couple of things that you've said. I see our newspaper reporters walk to the back of the room, but because sometimes the headline focuses on the things you could do better. But a couple of things you said. First, that we don't need a radical alteration, which was, I think, your exact words, of the way that we're approaching struggling learners. And second of all, that our core really is aligned with what the best practices are on the field. And you said you can only say that in about 10 to 20% of districts. So my hope is that that means we're starting from a pretty good spot with a good team who's got good programs and are engaged in doing good things for kids. And that by working with you, we can find out how we can even take that to another level, which is really exciting for me. So thanks for being part of this process, and to Dr. Wilcox and his team, again, thank you for having the courage to do it and to do it in such a public way.
It's our pleasure, and I really want to appreciate the leadership team of the district in being incredibly open, the process, that people were not defensive, that they were comfortable sharing both what was going well and their perception of what could be better. And I also want to give a lot of credit to the leadership that's really encouraging a very inclusive process, because these kinds of changes, you can't force them on a system. It really takes such a collaborative effort from special ed, general ed, central office, buildings, teachers, principals, parents. You got to get a lot of pieces and a lot of players working together to make this work well. And I think they're working on a path and a process that should allow us to do that. So it's our pleasure to be here, and we're very optimistic that we can build off of your strengths and help a lot of kids.
Thank you, but I think it's also really important that we recognize the two women who are sitting beside you, because
they do all the work, of course.
Well, they love the work, I know they do, but they've been very good friends to the system in terms of having that kind of nice way to critically engage us in some thought. So I want to thank both of you very much for the time you've spent in the district, because you've been here days and days with us now, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, anything additional on your update?
I have one more thing that I would like to share with the board and with the community. And many of you know that very shortly our score reports are going to be coming out. It may be early December before we actually release them, but we want to start talking a little bit about what those score reports mean. I have a very short video, 3.5 minutes, that I'd like to share with the board. But board members, please, I know that while you're well versed in this, others who may be watching this meeting today or later will benefit from seeing this. And we will also post the video so that our schools and individuals who watch at home on our Ustream can see it. So Jamie, if you'll run it, I think it would be informative for everyone in the room.
Soon you're going to receive reports showing how your child scored on the new state test in English, language arts, and mathematics. The results for your child and your school probably look different than previous state tests because the tests are different. For some more rigorous and aligned to new learning standards your state developed to better prepare your child and all students for the next grade and success after school,
in college, and careers.
In addition to addressing fundamental skills and concepts, the test includes questions that evaluate vital skills your child is developing, like critical thinking, problem solving, and analytical writing, all important to your child's future success.
Students can show their thinking and the steps they take to solve problems, which provides more detailed information to inform instruction.
When you look at your child's score report, the first item you'll see is your child's overall performance on the English, language arts, or math test. There's a separate report for each subject. Your child's overall performance is reported two ways, a performance level score and a numerical score. You'll notice the scores are grouped into 5 performance levels. Educators have established these levels to mark the extent to which your child has acquired the knowledge and skills students are expected to learn in each grade. On the graphic, you will see where your child's score falls within this range. You and your child's teachers and school can use this information to make decisions about how to support your child and enhance instruction. If your child scores at level 1, 2, or 3, it means he or she has areas to focus on to strengthen his or her skills and to be better prepared for the next steps in their education. This first year, many students may score in this range as they become more familiar with the new standards and assessments. Students who achieve level 4 or 5 on the assessments demonstrate a stronger understanding of the grade level material and are well positioned for continued success in the next grade and toward college and career readiness by graduation.
Compared to many previous state tests, scores may seem lower, but that's not because your child is learning less or falling behind. It's because he or she is being tested on new material that has been identified by educators, college faculty, and business leaders as essential for success in school.
In this first year of the new assessment, we're setting a new baseline. Student performance will improve in time as schools align instruction to the new standards and use information from these tests and other sources to meet your child's individual needs.
Below the overall performance section, you'll notice more detailed information about your child's performance on subject-specific skills identified by your state standards. These scores show how your child is learning these skills compared to students who are meeting grade level expectations in that area.
In this example, you will see information on reading and writing for the English Language Arts Literacy Assessment. The assessment has questions designed to evaluate specific reading skills, like comprehension of fiction and nonfiction texts and vocabulary. Other questions evaluate writing skills, like organizing and developing a summary of reading material. This more detailed information is new and different than previous tests. It is meant to help you and your child's teacher better understand your child's strengths and weaknesses so you can be partners in helping him or her thrive.
Getting results from PARCC and getting these scores from PARCC allows me to be able to make sure that I address the needs of my students more appropriately and more effectively.
You might be asking, well, what can I do now?
First, talk to the teacher. The teacher will have a ton of information, will give parents ideas of ways to help their student if they're falling a little bit behind, or ways to continue to grow a particular skill.
If you find that they're struggling with math, I would engage them in everyday real-world applications as it pertains to math, with the measuring in the kitchen or with some of the household finances.
There are also many resources for parents online, like bealearninghero.org or the National PTA. Please also visit understandthescore.org for additional information about the score report and for links to your state education department website.
Please remember that the success of your child and all students is the ultimate goal of the new standards and assessments. We have every confidence that all students can succeed in school and graduate prepared for college and careers.
So that video and others are going to be part of a comprehensive plan that we have to engage our community and talk about the PARCC assessments and our curriculum going forward. On our website, there are a number of resources that people will be steered to via the parent-teacher conferences and other opportunities. We're going to work with local media to get information out as well. I will also ask at an upcoming board meeting for Dr. Pugh to share some academic results, at least on preliminary findings that we have, particularly focused on the high school PARCC assessments that right now, while they are embargoed, I think we'll be in a position in a relatively short time to share with you that we're not too far from the results that you're seeing being reported in the state. That said, I'm going to turn this back to Board President Brightman and the next item on the agenda.
Very good. Thank you. And that would be personnel action. Mrs. Francisco. Not sure which one's working.
Either. Mrs. Brightman, Dr. Wilcox, members of the board, as discussed earlier in closed session, there are several personnel actions for your review and approval this afternoon.
Thank you. A motion, please.
Madam President, I move for the approval of personnel actions as recommended by staff.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. All those in favor of personnel action as recommended? Okay, 7-0, and student member abstains.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Francisco. Outstanding report today.
Short.
Madam President?
Yes.
We've been sitting for almost 3 hours now, and as I look ahead on the agenda, it looks as though we have another hour's worth of items to go. Is it possible for us to have a 5-minute break?
Certainly, I think you've seen several of us remove ourselves, but I'm happy to recess for 5 minutes if you feel that would be helpful.
Thank you.